Hi Marge, I'm Peggy. I'm one of the dietitians here at Kadlec, and we're going to talk today about heart-healthy foods. Following heart surgery or any kind of cardiac heart event, it's important to make good food choices to prevent the disease from progressing. Also at this time it seems like you're bombarded with information and seems like there's lists of do's and sometimes long lists of don'ts, and so we want to clear up some of the confusion about the nutrition today. As you came to this session, what's most important for you?
Well, I suppose I need to know what to do. I understand that lifestyle and especially eating plays a big impact in reoccurring events, and I want to be sure that I can perhaps not have this happen to me again.
Certainly, that's a good goal, a good goal. Well, one of the resources you have is this notebook about heart health care, and it's a real valuable source of information. And there certainly are controllable factors that you can make decisions about relative to nutrition, because food has an impact on controlling cholesterol, food has an impact on controlling high blood pressure, and you also want to choose foods that are going to maintain a healthy weight.
Well, and I cook for a family, so of course I will need to know how to factor in their needs without, and I do work out of the home.
So this needs to be practical.
So it has to have some practical applications in our life. I don't expect that we're going to probably be able to do this 100% perfectly, but I know some improvement in what we probably are already doing will go a long way for improving our health as a family. Well, you know, I was reading this book in my spare time while I was in my getting well and thinking about the future, and I am somewhat confused about all the terms that relate to cholesterol and what they really mean, and triglycerides. These are terms I've heard, but I don't know if I've ever had a good understanding of what they really mean.
Well, there are some fats in your blood that it's important to know the names of and also what they do, and then to be talking about what you can do to control them. And one of the terms that most of us are familiar with is cholesterol. And what's confusing about cholesterol is it's really not fat. Cholesterol is a waxy substance that's made by our livers, and in fact about 75% of what our cholesterol, what a blood cholesterol is what our liver produces. So that's the genetic piece of this. But a good quarter of it is impacted by what we choose to eat, and so the food choices can have a big impact on cholesterol. The problem with cholesterol in your blood is it forms hard particles or plaque on the artery walls, and that's what one of the risks for heart disease is. Now currently the recommendations are, as you see here, that cholesterol levels are less than 200, preferably less than 160. These guidelines keep changing, so it's important to keep up with this and to look at your lab reports and see where yours falls in relationship to the goals. Now this cholesterol is carried through our blood system in what's called fat packages, and there's some really long words like low density lipoprotein. Have you seen that word before?
Well, I think now that you mention it, I have.
Often you see the acronym LDL, and what that is, it's the bad cholesterol. And an easy way to remember this is that the LDL is the lethal, or I like to call it the lousy cholesterol, and the lower the number, the better. Because what LDL does, or the lousy cholesterol, it lays down the plaque on the artery walls. And the higher your LDL or your lousy cholesterol is, the more plaque you're likely to be laying down. Food has a significant impact on this lousy cholesterol, and so some of the food choices we talk about will be important in this regard. If you can have an LDL level of less than 100, that's good. The newer guidelines are even recommending that it's less than 70. The other part of this fat package is the good cholesterol. and that is the HDL, or the high density lipoprotein. And the way to remember that is with the H's. The HDL is healthy cholesterol, and the higher the number, the better. HDL actually gathers up cholesterol in the bloodstream and takes it to your liver to get rid of it. I've heard it referred to as the roto-rooter of the artery system. Food has some impact on this healthy cholesterol, but exercise is the most important thing to raise this HDL higher. The goal is to have it above 60 if you can, certainly above 50 is recommended to have a good balance between the good and the bad cholesterol. Now, one of the terms you mentioned was triglycerides, and that's a term that's not very well understood, and we don't hear much about it.
No.
And what triglycerides are is it's the fat we eat in food. It's also the fat that we store on our bodies. It comes from food, and it's very common in people with diabetes, actually. The management for getting rid of triglycerides, because it does contribute to that plaque buildup, is to maintain a moderate weight. Exercise is really important in bringing down triglycerides, and certain foods, particularly sugar and alcohol, raise triglycerides significantly. The guidelines currently say that a triglyceride level less than 150 is the goal. So when you go home tonight, you should take out the lab reports that you have copies of and look at these numbers and see how yours compare to them.
Well, thank you for that explanation, Peggy. That was really helpful. Now I think I have a better understanding. In a practical way, my thoughts are, how do I make the application in terms of the foods that I select at home?
And food makes a big difference in what your cholesterol level is. One of the food fats, or is cholesterol, and cholesterol that we eat in food has a direct impact on the cholesterol in our bloodstream. You only find cholesterol in animal products. It never has been, never was, in anything made from a vegetable. So when you see margarine labels that say no cholesterol, they never had any in them. It's only the animal products. Things like butter, things like red meats have fairly high cholesterol levels. And I think it's fairly common knowledge that egg yolks are a big source of cholesterol in our diets. Also, so the high-fat dairy products and the heavily marbled meats are the place that you want to watch for cholesterol. Another source of fat, though, that has a bigger impact on blood cholesterol is saturated fat. And saturated fat is also from animal products. A good way to remember saturated fat is that it is solid at room temperature.
Okay.
And so when you see the meat on the side of a piece of beef, it's hard and tallowy. It's very high in saturated fat because it is solid at room temperature. Butter, even if you leave it out on the counter, is still relatively hard at room temperature. And so it is also high in saturated fat. What saturated fat does is it triggers our livers to make more cholesterol. And that's how it has an impact on your blood cholesterol. The alternative to this is to eat leaner meats. Certainly to eat leaner cuts of beef, such as the tenderloin and the loin cuts of beef are lean, the flank steak is lean, the round and the rump roast. And you know when you go to the grocery store that when you look at meat that doesn't have a lot of marbling in the tissue, that's a fairly lean beef. The same holds true of pork. The pork loins are lean cuts of red meat. The alternative to the red meats that's even lower in fat is to eat more chicken and to eat more fish, which we'll talk about in a little while. With the dairy products, there's lots of alternatives out there to reduced fat dairy products. For instance, instead of drinking whole milk, you can drink skim milk. And they have some of these skim milks that have some extra additives in them so they don't look the blue color that everybody objects to for skim milk. You know how that goes.
Sure.
Families don't appreciate that sometimes. Instead of all the egg yolks, there's products out there that are egg substitutes. And these are made out of egg whites, so they're real eggs. And they have equivalent protein value of the eggs. They just don't have the cholesterol because the yolks are out of them. The other thing you can do when you're at home cooking is when a recipe calls for eggs, use 2 egg whites in place of a whole egg, and it works just fine in recipes.
We've tried these and we really like them.
Good, good. Yeah. They also, believe it or not, have fat-free half and half. Half and half is something you see in a lot of recipes. And there's a fat-free half and half that it's white, it looks good, it tastes good, it doesn't curdle when you cook it, and it would be a good substitute in cooking. So you see where we're going with this is that rather than trying all new recipes for your family, you can make substitutes in the way you're cooking your current recipes to improve them and make them heart healthier, not only for you, but for your whole family. So that's a real benefit.
Well, it helps seeing these products because now when I shop, I'm going to know what to look for.
You know, the other side of this, too, is to look at the portion sizes. Because even when we're eating lean meat, most people in our culture, in this country, eat too much. And a good relative amount of meat to eat is a piece of meat at a meal that's about the size of the palm of your hand and about the thickness of your little finger. So this is a 3-ounce, that's a 3-ounce piece of meat. That's 3 ounces of chicken. This happens to be a hamburger patty, but that's same. And everybody's hands are proportional to their body sizes, so that a man who has a larger hand would eat the same portion, palm size. It would be more ounces, but that's how much he would need. So that's a good reference when you're eating out or when you're at home trying to decide how much to eat. Now, Marge, another source of saturated fat is something called trans fats. And you may have been reading about these in the newspaper lately because they just now instituted labeling that a food label has to have how much trans fat is in it. What they found in the research is that trans fats are very, very powerful in triggering our bodies to make more cholesterol. So they're recommending that we keep the amount of trans fat that we eat down to almost 0 if we can. Trans fats aren't natural. They're a result of processing. They're when a manufacturer takes a liquid oil and hardens it into a solid saturated fat. And they do that in manufacturing because it increases the shelf life of products. So where you find this is something like a shortening that has been hardened into a solid. Sometimes you find it also in crackers, in biscuit mixes, pancake mixes, cake mixes where they want something to have a long shelf life, and so they introduce those trans fats into them. As much as you can, you want to stay away from trans fats, and it is now on the label whether or not they have any trans fats in them.
I see.
So it's a good piece of the label to look at. And there's a good label in your book here that you can refer back to. Another source of saturated fat that breaks the rules, you know, there's always an exception, and that is something called tropical oils. You've seen on labels sometimes palm oil, palm kernel oil, coconut oil.
Yes.
And these are tropical oils. They're liquid, but they are high in saturated fat, and they also will have your liver make more cholesterol. So as much as you can, you want to stay away from those. And again, that's not something that you and I would cook with. It is something that's going to be found in processed foods.
Can you think of some that it would chiefly have those tropical
Where you find the
oils?
tropical oils is again in things like crackers, biscuit mixes. Sometimes chips are fried in tropical oils because they have a good smoke point and it has a good flavor, and so that's where you often find
Somebody
these.
had mentioned they thought that movie popcorn had a lot of the tropical oils.
It does.
Is that true?
It's very true. It's very true. And it's coconut oil primarily. And again, it has a real high smoke point and tastes good, so it's used there. So when you're at the movies, if you can get the air-popped popcorn, which they now offer, that would be a good alternative. The healthy kinds of fat that you want to include more of in your diet are the polyunsaturated and monounsaturated fats. And these are fats that are usually liquid at room temperature, and they don't raise cholesterol like the saturated fats do. In fact, some of them can help lower the bad cholesterol, and the monounsaturated fats in particular can bring down the bad cholesterol and keep the good cholesterol high, so you have a better ratio in your system, which prevents that plaque buildup. Where they come from, the polyunsaturated fats come from safflower and sunflower and corn oil. But more important, I think, now is to use more of the monounsaturated fats. And with that, you have olive oil, which is very popular these days, lots of different flavors even that olive oil comes in. Canola oil is a monounsaturated fat that doesn't add any flavor to food. So it works well in recipes that you don't want to have the flavor that olive oil brings to food. Avocados are high in fat. Now, this is not a liquid, obviously. They're high in monounsaturated fat, so it's a good kind of fat. And another important source of monounsaturated fats are nuts. And people have been afraid of nuts for years because they are relatively high in calories. But in small amounts, and people always groan at this, but 6 to 8 nuts at a time, these are very good sources of monounsaturated fats. The nuts that have the most monounsaturated fats are almonds, pecans, and peanuts, and cashews also are high in monounsaturated fats. Can you think of some ways you could add nuts to the foods that you eat?
Well, I suppose that we could have them as a healthy snack. We can certainly pack them in lunches. That would be a good way. I think I've been seeing more use of nuts in toasted and as a topping, perhaps in a salad.
They taste really good that way, and that's a good way to just get a little bit. What you don't want to do is sit down with the jar of peanuts while you're watching television and start munching on them. You do want to portion them out so you don't get too many calories from them.
Tell me, I suppose as I look at the label, it is a little confusing knowing how to make a selection about, is this the best brand for me to buy, or should I go with a more popular national brand and pay more of a high price, or how does one actually read a
It really doesn't matter when you're looking at the monounsaturated fats, because the fat profile is the same. So some people prefer a lighter oil than the darker olive oils. It's really a taste preference, and there's no fat. There's no difference in the amount of fat from olive oil to canola oil. They're all pure fat, but they're the right kind of fat. When you're using another source of the mono and polyunsaturated fats are the margarines out there. And the rule of thumb here is that the softer a fat is at room temperature, the better off you are. So you're better off with a tub margarine than you are with a stick margarine, because the stick margarine has been hardened and therefore has that saturated fat.
More of that.
So it doesn't matter. There's lots of brands out there, and again, there's a taste preference to what you choose. But in general, a margarine that is soft in a tub is going to be your best choice for heart health.
Do you find that people are liking this spray application?
Have you ever tried it?
I never really have, but I have a friend that uses this, particularly in the summer, on her vegetables and corn particularly. And so I wondered what
one of the issues with fat is to not get too much is that is portion control, and this does the portion control for you because you just spray it on instead of having it melt on your food. Also in cooking, it's useful to use the spray fats, many different brands out there, but it allows you to put a little bit of fat in a pan so that things don't stick, but it doesn't add so much fat that you're adding extra calories. And then you can use your fat on the food as salad dressings or as nuts on your salad, and that's a better way to get fat than to fry in fat. The final fat that I want to talk about that's in food is a fat called omega-3 fatty acids. And this is fish oil. And you've read in the magazines and in the newspapers how important it is to include fish in your diet. One of the things that they've found is that the fish oils help lower cholesterol, and they particularly help to bring down triglycerides. So the recommendation is to include fish into your meals a couple of times a week or so to get those omega-3 fatty acids, because they're not readily available in other foods. Salmon is a very good source of fish oil. Tuna fish is an important source of fish oil. It's best to get tuna packed in water because the fish oil is still in there, and you don't get the calories from other oils when it's packed in water. Flaxseed has a lot of omega-3 fatty acids. Is one of the non-fish sources that you can find. It's important that you buy ground flax meal, but this is something you could sprinkle on cereal or put into breads or muffins to increase the omega-3 fatty acid content.
Well, I knew people were using flax. I just wasn't sure how to fit it in. It might be a good addition in a muffin, or
it would be very good
like
that way.
Or
very
quick
good
bread.
Very good that way.
Good.
Yes, yes. So those are the fats that are in the foods. It also makes a difference how much fat you eat. And there's some tables in your heart book here that tell you how to read labels for fat. What's important, I think the most practical way is to have a fat budget. You know, there's a lot of calculations about 30% of your calories from fat and 7% of your calories from saturated fat. And you start going, well, I need to carry a calculator around with me to ever figure this out. And I think the piece that does most good is to look at a fat budget. You know, most men need a total fat for the day of about 55 to 60 grams, and about 14 to 15 grams of saturated fat is the total amount that should be eaten. For women, that amount is about 45 grams of total fat a day and less than 12 grams of saturated fat a day. So when you're looking at a label, you would look at the serving size and you would look at the total fat to decide, how does this food fit in? If you were looking at a package of sausages, for instance, at the grocery store, and you looked at that one sausage serving size, and it had 28 grams of fat in that one sausage, and you say your budget is 45, you'd know that was a very high-fat product, and you might want to look for something else.
Right.
So to me, this is the most practical way to use these as reference numbers and to actually memorize them so that you know what you're doing when you're at the grocery store. Because your best solution to eating healthy is to make good choices at the grocery store so that when you're at home, you don't have so many decisions to make.
Well, that really helps. Now, that formula is very helpful for shopping.
And keep it simple. Serving size, total fat, and saturated fat grams, and look at the actual grams rather than the percentages, and I think that'll help you read labels and choose foods better for your family.
Now that I'm cooking for my family and it's getting ready for dinner, are there other practical suggestions that I could incorporate into my meal planning scheme?
Well, you know, once you've chosen low-fat foods, you want to make sure that you use cooking methods that they stay low in fat. So the best thing to do for meats is to bake them or broil them, put them on the barbecue in the summer or even all winter.
That would be good.
Some ways so that the fat doesn't be absorbed into the meat. And so that's really important to do. Also, as we mentioned before, to use the spray fat if you're ever using a pan to fry in. I think it's a good idea to think about some of the recipes that you commonly use and say, how can I make that healthier? For instance, do you ever make beef stroganoff?
Well, I did a long time ago, but then got away from doing it simply because I felt the ingredients were rather high in fat, and I didn't think that we needed the extra calories.
But now that you know that you can choose a lower fat meat, for instance, if you made that stroganoff with sirloin steak, which is very lean, that would be a good starting point. And when you think about sautéing the onions and the mushrooms, if you do that in the spray fat instead of the usual quarter cup of butter that they tell you to do it in, that will save a lot of calories. And if you use non-fat sour cream instead of the regular sour cream, you're going to come up with a product that your family is familiar with and they will like. And it saves you from learning how to cook all over again and always searching for new recipes. And so there is a handout in your notebook here that talks about how to make substitutes that are healthier. One of them that works very well is, most of us like casseroles because they're easy to feed a family and they stretch the budget. There are some soups out there that are lower in fat and lower in sodium than the normal, what I call casserole soups, the cream of chicken, cream of mushroom soups. And this would be a good substitute when you're making tuna casserole or chicken and rice for your family.
Really good. I hadn't, not even familiar with this product.
And so it's a way to make this easy for you so you're not having to learn things all over again.
Very good to know about that.
And there's a good list of some other substitutes here that you can read and see which foods you're currently cooking with and what you might substitute for them.
That will help me quite a lot in planning my menus.
Good, good. There are a few other nutrients that have an impact on heart health. One of them is fiber. And fiber also can help lower cholesterol. It also helps control diabetes and can help lower blood pressure. The kind of fiber that does the best job of this is one called soluble fiber. And there's also insoluble fiber in foods. The soluble fiber is found in oats, And so it's you find it in oatmeal, oat cereals like Cheerios, you notice have the heart label on them now because they're high in soluble fiber. You also find soluble fiber in beans. So whether it's pinto beans, kidney beans, garbanzo beans, split peas, any way that you can incorporate more beans into your meal plans, the higher the fiber content. They're also a fantastic source of protein that doesn't have any fat with it. So it's very beneficial to be doing some vegetarian meals, or at least including beans in your meals more often. The insoluble fiber is found in whole grains. And it's important to eat whole wheat bread. They don't have as much impact on the cholesterol, the heart health, but they certainly have a beneficial impact on colon health. And so it's good to have a variety of fibers in your diet.
And this says whole grain right
Yes.
on the label.
And you
Is that an important to look for that?
Yes,
to
and in
say
fact
whole
it's even
grain?
more important to look on the ingredient list to make sure that the first ingredient is whole grain flour. And so it's not just white flour with brown coloring in it, which some of the brown breads
But
are.
this has actually, I can see some of the seeds and things here.
Well, you know, a good rule of thumb is the more you have to chew something, the higher the fiber content is, and the better nutrition you're getting out of it. Well, Marge, have you ever been told to eat less salt?
Well, now that you mention it, my doctor has mentioned it from time to time. It seems my blood pressure varies a bit. It's when it's running high, if I might be at his office, and he'd say it may be a good idea for us to consider moderating our sodium intake. I never quite made the connection between why we have to do that and what it really has to do with blood pressure improvement. And of course then the next question becomes, how do you implement this in your eating repertoire? It's another step along with all the other things. So it's nice to know it in a simple way, and you've been really describing things very practically here. So,
well, salt is related to blood pressure. And you're right, there's a lot of information that comes through, and it is important to take things a step at a time. And so maybe the next step after you've implemented some of the changes in the fats and the foods that you're eating is to start looking at sodium. Sodium is what raises blood pressure. What salt and sodium does is it acts like a sponge in your artery system, and it pulls water into those confined spaces that are the arteries and the veins. And as you have more water in there, it increases pressure in that area, and as there's more fluid in there, the heart has to work harder to pump the blood through that system. So cutting down on sodium can reduce blood pressure by reducing the amount of fluid that's in that system. And save the heart, basically. Now, one source of salt that we're all familiar with is the table salt. The general recommendation when we're reducing sodium is to eat 2,000 to 2,400 milligrams of sodium a day. That's what's in 1 teaspoon. The average American eats 5,000 to 6,000 milligrams a day, which is about 3 teaspoons, about triple what the recommendation is. The reason that sodium intake is so high is because of the way we live. Our lifestyles lead us to choose a lot of processed and quick-to-fix foods. And processed foods are where you find the most sodium, even more than most people add at the table, from table salt. So when you're using pasta mixes, rice mixes, instant soups, the flavoring packets that we use for gravies and for sloppy joes and so forth, those are real significant sources of sodium in our diets. And we start looking at these labels, and you'll notice that on this one, if you're eating just about a cup of this pasta mix, you're getting 750 milligrams of sodium. And a cup is not very much. Most of us would eat more than that. So the idea here is to use fewer of these processed mixes and keep things simple. If you're making rice and noodles in your own kitchen without the mixes, they aren't going to have a high sodium content at all.
I didn't realize we got this much sodium in just soups. It's very easy to get to your 2,000. It sounds like it would take a lot of consumption of these types of products, but heavens, just a cup of this is over 700. That's a lot.
It's a lot.
I was curious though about Oriental foods. Are they rather high? Because you can really taste a lot of
Yes.
salt
Yes.
if you go out to to have Asian types of foods.
And many Asian foods are high in sodium. Some restaurants still use MSG, but many don't anymore, so you can always
Okay.
ask that question. Soy sauce, of course, is a major source of sodium. When you're at home, you can buy light soy sauce. So it has half the amount of sodium, adds the flavor without adding the salt.
Well, that's good to know. I certainly will look for that product.
And again, in your notebook here, there's a whole list of spices to use, because we want flavor out of food. You want food that tastes good, and your family does too. There are a lot of things you can do with the spices that you have in your cupboard. You know, if you have cloves and bay leaves and oregano, use the spices in your cupboard to flavor food without adding salt to them.
So a powder, in other words, is going to be all right.
And if you're using, you want to make sure it's garlic powder, not garlic salt. There also are many salt-free spice mixes out there. Mrs. Dash is probably the most popular one that people bring up. But there are salt-free lemon herb seasonings. And so the next time you're at the grocery store, look in the spice aisle and find some of these salt-free combinations so that you can add flavor to food without adding salt.
Very good. Those are very helpful tips.
Now, one of the questions that usually comes up is there are also salt substitutes that you're going to find at the grocery store. These are made with potassium chloride instead of sodium chloride, so they don't raise blood pressure. However, there are some blood pressure medications that you cannot use these salt substitutes with. So before you use those, be sure to ask your doctor about salt substitutes. Or ask your pharmacist or your dietitian about using salt substitutes, because they're not a good idea with some blood pressure medications.
Are there other foods that we need to be aware of? I feel as though now that we're making some major changes, we may consider that along with our other lifestyle concerns. We probably wouldn't mind dropping a pound or two or more here and there. I feel that would be good to do. What other suggestions, Peggy, could you give me to carry home to my family and apply even to myself to achieve that?
Yeah. Well, certainly moderate weight loss is a goal. Because did you know for every extra pound of body fat you have an extra mile of blood vessels to supply it? And they're tiny, but still significant for that heart to have to work on. And fat, of course, is a major contributor calorie-wise. So we've already talked about reducing fat in things that you're preparing. Sugar and alcohol are the other two major calorie sources. Cutting back on sugar can cut back your calorie consumption. And when you think about where we get sugar, it's usually has fat with it.
You're right.
You know, where do you get sugar? You have cookies, you have cakes, you have
brownies.
donuts, and they have a lot of fat with them. And the calories from them don't have any nutrition with it. So it's better to spend your calories on food that gives you nutrition than it is just food that has calories in it. And save those desserts for occasional.
Just once in a while.
Once in a while, certainly, certainly. Sugared beverages are a big source of calories in our families. And, you know, they don't have any satisfaction from them. They find that people who drink sugared drinks still eat big quantities at meals. It doesn't take away their appetite. So drinking water or non-sugared drinks is a good idea to substitute.
If we eat a lot of extra calories and we don't burn it off in energy, Peggy, where do those calories go?
Your body is very good at storing calories just in case there's a famine sometime, and we store them as fat. So all those foods go to the liver, and the liver says, extra calories, let's turn that into fat just in case. And all that extra fat has an impact on heart health.
And alcohol does the same thing.
Alcohol does turn to fat by your liver. Now there's some information that alcohol can have some heart benefits. Most recommendations at this point in time are saying if you drink alcohol, limit it to 1 drink a day. And they're also recommending that if you don't drink alcohol, there's no good reason to start, because certainly there are other risks with alcohol use regarding liver function. Often alcohol has an impact on some of the medications that you're taking. And so don't start drinking. Start and discuss it with your doctor.
Very
because this
good.
information is still controversial, and alcohol does add a lot of calories quickly.
Do you have any other tips to help us live closer to these new lifestyle changes? Any practical helps that perhaps with my shopping or maybe eating out, or any strategies that we could employ?
We talked a little bit about shopping before, that the decisions you make at the grocery store are so important. And when you think about your shopping, you need to get ready for that process. And one of the chief things is to make a list. And the hard part about making a list is sticking to it once you're at the grocery store. Where you find the healthiest foods are around the edge of the grocery store. The perimeter of the store is the safest place to shop. Because as you think about the outside of the store, you have the produce department, you have the meat department, you have the dairy department, and then usually the bakery's in there someplace. But those are foods that you can make real healthy choices for heart health. So that's where to spend most of your time. There are other things to do when you're shopping. One of them is to not go shopping when you're hungry.
That's very true.
Some people will even limit the amount of money they take with them so that they don't buy extra when they're at the grocery store and only come home with what was on the list. A lot of people leave their children home or their grandchildren home when they're shopping because they entice us to buy other foods that weren't on the list. So the decisions you make shopping are important.
Right.
The first few times you go shopping after you're looking at this and reading for fat grams and reading for sodium, you may find that the shopping takes a little longer. Most of us eat the same foods over and over. So once you've identified the kind of cereal, the kind of crackers, the kind of margarine that your family likes, it won't take you so long the next time.
That's true. Practice. Kind of practice.
As far as eating out goes, you know, the average family eats out about 1/3 of their meals, at least 1/3 of their meals. So the decisions you make eating out are just as important as those you make at home. So as we've been talking, and as you've been thinking about the foods that you're eating, what do you think some of the important things are to look for when you're eating out?
Well, I suppose I would want to explore what particular places to go to that accommodate the needs of heart health and more prudent eating. I may call before we go, perhaps for a nice dinner, or I may even be worth a trip to go by and ask to look over a menu before making that kind of decision, and writing to the company, or perhaps even going online.
There are good websites for the fast food companies that list their nutrition information. Some restaurants, stopping by to look at their menu would be a good idea, because some restaurants actually identify heart healthy items on their menus. It's very easy these days to ask people to make changes to foods that you order, and to ask for fats that are on the side, to ask if there's a sauce over the chicken, can they leave that off? Can you put your dressing on the side and put your own on there so you don't get quite so much? One of the biggest challenges eating out is portion size. What do you notice about the plates when you eat out?
It's more food than we generally can feel comfortable eating, so I suppose the better thing to do is just plan that you will be taking it home and,
That's right.
and having it the next day. So,
and strategies are to even take that food off your plate before you start to eat and put it in a to-go box rather than having it sit there, or sharing food with a partner. You know, if you share a meal and each get your own salad or soup, restaurants are usually very accommodating in that. And then ask questions about how foods are prepared. What does this mean when it's sautéed? What is it sautéed in? And ask questions.
Well, I know some restaurants, a friend was telling me that they go to a popular local restaurant, and in fact, if they eat in the early hours, perhaps 4:30 to 6 o'clock, they're getting a much better value. These are available for I would assume everybody, but maybe restricted to seniors or whatever, but that you can really get perhaps smaller portions, more realistic portions, and the cost is considerably less.
Yes. And senior portions are generally smaller, and it often doesn't matter what age you are. You can ask for portions off the senior menu, and they will provide those to you.
That's good. That's
Sometimes the child's menu, or ordering a la carte off of menus instead of ordering the number 3 plate.
Right.
If you order the separate pieces, you can control the quantities a little bit better. So, you know, a lot of this, Marge, is thinking about what changes do I need to make, and in what order do I need to make them.
Right.
Keep in mind the word moderation,
Right.
because that is, it takes it away from these good food lists and these bad food lists into how do I enjoy the foods that I like to eat without having them have a negative impact on my heart health. And to make changes a step at a time, and to think about things a little bit more than you have in the past. But these nutrition changes can make big impacts on heart health and make you feel like you have control over this and are doing the best you can for your own health.
Well, it sounds as if there's a lot of good ideas to include. I'm going to very definitely sit down and work through some menu planning while this is fresh in my mind. But it's also good to know that I can go back to my resource and refer to this, because it is so detailed and complete, that if I have questions or problems that I can at least know where to go. But it's been very helpful to have other options, and perhaps I'll spend some time at the bookstore looking at some cookbooks and finding recipes that fit into my family's likes and dislikes and so forth. I can see that that would be time well spent, in addition to probably a little field trip to the grocery store. So these are all things that we can do, but this has been very...
And feel free to call the dietitians for further information, because they will be glad to answer your questions over the phone.
Very good to know.
Well, good luck to you, Marge.
Thank you, Peggy.